Welcome back. Just days after Adnan Syed's conviction was vacated, Hae Min Lee's family says he should be sent back to prison. Syed's case rose to fame in 2014 when the podcast Serial broke listening records. The investigative series cast doubt on Syed's 2000 conviction for the murder of his ex-girlfriend, 18-year-old Hae Min Lee. Since he was arrested back in 1999, Syed has maintained his innocence. He spent more than 20 years behind bars. Last week, a Maryland judge ruled to vacate Syed's conviction, saying state evidence in the original investigation wasn't handed over to the defense, and that 2 murder suspects were cleared that should not have been. Hae Min Lee's family is now appealing the judge's decision based on their rights as victims, arguing the hearing violated their rights as victims to meaningfully participate in the proceeding. During the hearing, Lee's brother spoke via Zoom, but argues he wanted to speak in person. Terry, what law in Maryland, is allowing the victim's family to appeal like this, and what exactly is the Lee family appealing?
So, Brian, under the Maryland Code of Criminal Procedure, a crime victim who is not a party to this proceeding, that victim can ask an appellate court to review any final order that could violate their rights. And so the review would be conducted by the Maryland Court of Special Appeals. It's interesting, they're claiming that they didn't have notice to vacate Syed's conviction and that they wanted to appear, and they did ultimately appear. I suspect that they will have other reasons to go before that appellate court, and they'll justify, because it was just a short order that they did in that notice. So we'll see what else they have to say.
Yeah. Now, Josh, how will this affect Syed, and is the DNA evidence the prosecution is waiting for strong enough to decide this case one way or another?
I don't think this will have much of an effect on Syed's case at all, because we're talking about totally different things, right? Whether or not the victims were afforded the proper rights that they should have been and had an ability to have their voice heard in court is an entirely different question as to whether or not there is enough evidence to hold this man to answer for these murders and to continue to hold him in custody. And if the prosecution no longer has confidence in their case, then they shouldn't be affected by whether or not the victims had a right to be heard, in spite of that being unfortunate. As far as this DNA evidence goes, time will tell. We'll see exactly what it is. But I have to imagine, or you hope, that the prosecution took that into consideration before making their decision to withdraw his conviction. So you would imagine that the evidence doesn't play as great a role in their determination of whether or not he's connected to these murders. And I suspect that we will see that they won't bring a prosecution in this case.
Well, like you said, time will tell, and we'll keep eyes on that decision. When we come back, Tennessee defendant Ezekiel Kelly now faces nearly 30 charges following the mobile mass murder in Memphis, which left 3 dead and several others injured. Welcome back to Law&Crime Daily. Kidnapped and slain Tennessee jogger Eliza Fletcher died from her gunshot wound to the head, according to the newly released autopsy results. Police say the 34-year-old mother of 2 was kidnapped while jogging near the University of Memphis in the early morning hours of September 2nd. Her body was found 3 days later in a field near an abandoned home. Officials connected 38-year-old Cleotha Abson Henderson to the crime through DNA. He was arrested and charged with Fletcher's kidnapping and murder. Surveillance video reportedly caught the kidnapping on camera. Abson Henderson had previously served 20 years in a separate kidnapping case. According to the autopsy report released Thursday, Fletcher died of a single gunshot wound to the back of her head. The report says she was shot from an indeterminate range and that a shell casing was found near her body. It also states Fletcher suffered blunt force trauma injuries to her head and to each of her legs. Abson Henderson has not yet entered a plea in the case. Also in Memphis, the man accused of killing 3 people and shooting several others during an hours-long mobile mass shooting earlier this month is indicted on an additional 26 charges following the rampage. Ezekiel Kelly now faces nearly 30 charges in the September 7th shooting spree, which left the defendant's friends, 24-year-old Dwayne Tunstall, Allison Parker, and Richard Clark dead, along with 3 others shot and injured. Up until now, Kelly faced just 1 count of first-degree murder. This week, Kelly was indicted on 26 additional charges, including 2 more counts of first-degree murder, 5 counts of reckless endangerment, 4 counts of attempted murder, attempted carjacking, robbery, among several other charges. Earlier this week, Kelly appeared in court for a hearing, though none of his witnesses who were set to testify showed up. The judge signed warrants for their arrests. Kelly's next court hearing is set for October 18th. Josh, how does a criminal defendant end up with more charges after a grand jury than before? And do these charges make sense?
You have to remember that a grand jury is essentially a probable cause hearing. And what happens is the prosecution brings in all of their evidence, presents that to the grand jury, and asks them to return indictments on what they feel that they've been able to prove. So going into that, they may have only charged him with 1 count, but the evidence that they presented in front of the grand jury was enough to bring back all of these other charges. Now, whether or not he actually pleads to all of those charges or whether or not he actually goes to trial and is convicted on all those charges is another thing, because the probable cause hearing is simply that. It's a hearing where it's determined that there's probable cause to hold him to answer for these charges, and they believe that they have enough evidence to at least reach that standard. And yes, these charges do make sense. When you're talking about this type of a rampage that took place where several shots were fired, you can imagine why you might see attempt murder charges and other types of assault charges that we're seeing in this case.
Absolutely. Now, Terry, earlier this year, Tennessee Governor Bill Lee paused all executions scheduled for 2022 for independent review of the protocols. Will this affect if the prosecution seeks the death penalty here?
You know, I think they're going to think twice about seeking the death penalty, but I think they might just proceed forward because this is why. This is a heinous murder. Like Josh was just saying, this involved multiple deaths. It was thought out and it was well planned. And, you know, I think that this is just a pause. It's not overturning the death sentence in Tennessee. And we've seen this before. We saw it out in California. Governor Newsom did it, and the prosecutors in that state still sought it. So I think they might here too.
All right, we'll see as they continue, and I agree with you as well. Well, thank you, Josh and Terry, and thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.